Rajesh and Meera Malhotra seemed like the perfect couple, an accomplished doctor and a successful software engineer building a dream life in Canada. But behind their polished smiles and quiet suburban home, Rajesh was hiding a dangerous double life filled with gambling, secret debts, and forbidden love. No one knew that the very choices he made in silence would spiral into betrayal, fear, and ultimately, a brutal tragedy that shocked everyone who thought they knew him. Dr. Rajesh Malhotra's story began like the kind of dream many people chase. After years of hard work in India, he and his wife Meera immigrated to Canada with hopes of a better life. The move wasn't easy, but for Rajesh, opportunities came quickly. He secured a position as a cardiologist at a respected hospital in Toronto, a role that brought him both admiration and stability. Colleagues praised his intelligence and gentle manner with patients, while friends admired how quickly he had adapted to life in a new country. His wife, a talented software engineer, also found success in her field, and together they built the picture of a perfect immigrant couple. The Malhotras soon purchased a modest but beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. They hosted dinners where laughter filled the rooms, and the smell of traditional Indian cooking lingered long after the guests left. Meera would often talk about how proud she was of her husband, and neighbors noticed the way Rajesh always seemed calm and collected, balancing work and family life with grace. To anyone looking in from the outside, they had everything: prestige, financial security, and a solid marriage. Yet beneath the polished surface, Rajesh's mind carried more than just professional responsibilities. His drive to succeed sometimes felt like a heavy burden, and the high expectations he set for himself created cracks that only he could sense. The demands of patients, the pressure to stand out among other doctors, and the quiet loneliness of starting over in a new country all began to weigh on him. Still, he kept his worries hidden. He wanted to be seen as reliable, trustworthy, and strong. No one, not his wife, not his colleagues, not his closest friends, suspected that his carefully constructed life was the first layer of a secret he guarded closely. Rajesh's long shifts at the hospital gave him the perfect excuse to disappear into another world, one that few would ever associate with a respected doctor. It began innocently, or at least that's how he justified it to himself. After exhausting days filled with emergencies and diagnoses, he sought release from the pressure. A colleague once mentioned a private gathering where cards and dice passed the time, and curiosity led him there. The dimly lit basement, thick with smoke and murmurs, was a sharp contrast to the sterile brightness of hospital corridors. For Rajesh, it felt like stepping into another identity, one where he wasn't a doctor, a husband, or a role model, but simply a man chasing risk and thrill. What began as casual play soon turned into late nights and heavier wagers. The small victories made him feel alive, but the losses cut deeper each time. Before long, gambling wasn't just a distraction. It became a dangerous obsession. He told Meera he was working overtime, and she never questioned him. After all, he often came home exhausted, which seemed to confirm his story. But the truth was that he was losing more than just money. Debt crept in quietly at first, a few $1,000s owed here and there. When his salary couldn't cover the losses, Rajesh turned to private lenders who operated outside the law. They promised quick cash with no questions asked, but the interest was brutal. The deeper he sank, the more he convinced himself he could win it all back with just one lucky night. Each game pulled him further away from the life he had built with Meera, leaving a widening gap between the man everyone respected and the secret gambler who was spiraling out of control. Even as the weight of debt pressed on him, Rajesh created yet another shadow in his life. At the hospital, where patients and staff admired his steady hands and calm voice, he began seeking comfort in dangerous places. Among the nurses, one stood out: young, ambitious, and eager to be noticed. What began as long conversations after late shifts slowly shifted into something more. For Rajesh, the relationship offered escape. With her, he could forget the suffocating debts, the pressure at home, and the image he was so desperate to protect. For the nurse, it was intoxicating to be close to a man she saw as successful and charming. The affair started quietly. He took her out under the pretense of medical conferences and overnight call duties. The secrecy made the moments more intense, but also more reckless. Rajesh felt like he was balancing on a knife's edge. One misstep, and the entire facade of his life could collapse. But the thrill outweighed the fear, at least in the beginning. With every secret meeting, he convinced himself he was still in control, unaware of how tangled things were becoming. Whispers soon began to circulate. Hospitals are places where nothing stays hidden for long. Colleagues noticed how often he lingered around her station, or how they seemed to vanish at the same time during breaks. Some chalked it up to coincidence, others smirked knowingly. None of them dared to tell Meera, but the quiet gossip was spreading like smoke through hallways. Meanwhile, the nurse's expectations grew. She wanted promises, future plans, and more commitment than Rajesh could afford to give. Caught between his marriage, his debts, and this secret romance, Rajesh didn't realize he was weaving a net of lies so tight that eventually, escape would be impossible. By the time winter settled over Toronto, Rajesh's secret world began collapsing. The lenders who once spoke in smooth tones now delivered sharp reminders. At first, it was phone calls that came at odd hours, his name whispered with threats disguised as suggestions. Soon, the warnings became bolder. Notes appeared on his car windshield, written in hurried scrawls demanding repayment. Some were slipped under his office door at the hospital, where anyone could have found them. The message was clear, his time was running out. Fear seeped into his daily life. Walking to the parking lot after a late shift, he would glance over his shoulder, convinced someone was following him. Driving home, he checked his mirrors obsessively, half expecting another vehicle to stay close no matter which turn he made. Even inside his home, the one place that had always been safe, the unease lingered. Small noises unsettled him. Shadows in the hallway seemed to shift. Meera noticed changes she couldn't explain. Rajesh no longer slept soundly. He woke drenched in sweat, sitting upright as though he had just escaped some nightmare. His appetite dwindled, and he snapped at her over trivial matters. When she asked what was wrong, he blamed the stress of long hours at the hospital. It was an easy excuse, believable enough to silence her questions. But the truth was far more sinister. The debts weren't just numbers on paper anymore. They were men with sharp eyes and unforgiving methods. Rajesh knew what they were capable of. He had seen enough to understand that failure to pay could end in violence. Still, instead of confiding in his wife or seeking help, he retreated further into silence. Each passing day, the walls of his double life pressed tighter, and the danger drew closer. One evening in February, when the streets outside were glazed with ice and snow piled against doorways, Meera returned home earlier than expected. Rajesh had told her he would be working a long shift, but his car was already in the driveway. Surprised, she stepped inside quietly, and what she noticed first was the faint smell of cigarette smoke in the air, unusual for their otherwise neat and orderly home. Curiosity led her to the study, where she began tidying papers scattered across the desk. What she found among them changed everything she thought she knew about her husband. There were envelopes stuffed with loan documents, some marked with alarming interest rates that no bank would ever approve. Alongside them lay handwritten notes filled with threats, some blunt, others chillingly vague. Receipts from underground casinos, their names scribbled out but still recognizable, painted a picture of nights spent far from hospital wards. Meera's hands shook as she pieced together the puzzle. The man she had trusted completely was hiding a world of risk, dishonesty, and danger. When Rajesh returned home that night, she confronted him with the evidence. Shock flickered across his face before he tried to compose himself. The truth, or at least part of it, spilled out. He admitted his gambling, his reckless decisions, and the debts that had grown beyond control. He swore he was trying to fix it, that he would find a way to make everything right. But he left out the most explosive secret, the affair that had entangled him even further. For Meera, the revelation was devastating. Anger and betrayal swirled with fear, not just for her marriage, but for their safety. The couple argued late into the night, voices rising and falling, their once solid foundation fractured beyond repair. The night it happened was bitterly cold, the kind that made the city feel deserted after dark. Rajesh was scheduled for an overnight shift at the hospital, but he never arrived. When he failed to check in, colleagues assumed he had been delayed by weather or traffic. Hours passed before concern turned into alarm. At dawn, his car was discovered abandoned in a deserted industrial lot, its doors locked, his phone left behind on the passenger seat. To investigators, it was immediately suspicious. Doctors rarely missed shifts without warning, and Rajesh had never been unreliable before. Later that morning, police received a call about a disturbance in a nearby warehouse. Inside, they found him. The scene was grim. Rajesh's body was tied with rough cords, his face bruised, his clothes torn. The violence was deliberate, a message written not in words, but in injuries. Whoever had done this wanted him to suffer before the end. There were no signs of robbery. His wallet and watch were still on him, suggesting this was not a random crime, but a targeted act. When news reached the hospital, staff were stunned. A respected doctor had vanished and then reappeared in the worst possible way. Rumors spread quickly, whispers about debts, shady connections, and personal scandals that had long been overlooked. At home, Meera collapsed under the weight of grief and confusion. Just weeks earlier, she had uncovered part of her husband's double life, but she had never imagined it would end like this. Detectives began piecing together the fragments: loan shark ties, late-night disappearances, threatening letters. Yet another thread emerged too: stories of a secret relationship with a nurse. Both motives, money and jealousy, hung heavy in the air. The investigation was just beginning, but already, it was clear this was no ordinary murder. Rajesh's death left shockwaves rippling through every part of his life. To neighbors, it was unthinkable that the kind, polite doctor who waved as he drove to work could meet such a violent end. They spoke in hushed tones, trying to reconcile the man they knew with the disturbing revelations that began surfacing in newspapers and on local broadcasts. At the hospital, colleagues who once admired his dedication found themselves replaying recent months in their minds, recalling rumors of gambling and whispered gossip about an affair that no one had dared to confirm. Now those whispers felt like warnings that had gone unheard. For Meera, the tragedy was twofold. She had lost her husband in the most brutal way possible, but she also discovered that the life she thought she shared with him had been built on half-truths and secrets. Every memory felt tainted, every moment overshadowed by the realization that she had never fully known the man she loved. While police questioned her repeatedly, she cooperated, handing over the threatening notes and financial records she had found. Yet she carried a private torment, anger at his betrayals mixed with sorrow for the man she had trusted. The investigation stretched on for months. Detectives leaned heavily toward organized crime, convinced his unpaid debts had caught up with him. But there were inconsistencies, timelines that didn't fit neatly, testimony from hospital staff that hinted at jealousy and tension. Some believed his affair had drawn him into another kind of danger, one fueled not by money but by emotions spiraling out of control. No arrests were ever made. The case remains unsolved, suspended between theories and unanswered questions. Rajesh's story became a haunting reminder that even the most polished lives can conceal shadows, and sometimes those shadows swallow everything.